Hi, hello, hey, and welcome to my tent, a place to hear life experiences, different opinions, a range of journeys, and a viewpoint different than our own. A place to challenge our own thoughts, a space to learn a little bit, and I promise some fun along the way. I believe we're better when we let a range of people into our tents, so welcome to mine. Did you know that our health is encompassed by way more than just food and fitness? Did you know I'm a health coach? What is a health coach? I can tell you. I work with individuals and groups to look at all aspects of life that help make us truly well. I have structured programs to help you create realistic, challenging but achievable, and long-term transformations that span long past our time working together. I help you take a multifaceted approach to your health, ranging from food, fitness, relationships, work-life balance, financial health, gratitude and joy, creativity, career, and more. If you are looking to make a health transformation, visit my website in the show notes or email me, sarah@sarahjohnstonwellness.com. Cheers to good health.
Hey.
Hello, hello.
Hi there.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I am doing well. It is good to have you in the tent, Gary. I'm excited because of all of the things that we're going to discuss, but brain surgery and paranormal, when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, we're going to have a conversation because those two things I'm fascinated by. So in general, I think everyone's going to get a lot out of this episode, but some really interesting topics to come. So we can dive right in. If you just want to give a little introduction of yourself, who you are, maybe where you live now, a brief background, and then we can get into your journey, your experience, and what you're doing today.
Okay. Well, it's a tall order.
It is. You can make it general.
I'll see if I can remember at least to do one or two of what you're asking. But I mean, first of all, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be a guest with you and looking forward to a great discussion. So thank you. Thank you truly from the bottom of my heart.
I'm excited to have you.
Well, again, it is truly an honor. But who am I? I'm a person.
Best answer yet. Best answer to date on this podcast. I'm a person.
But I guess, well, it gets to the heart of one of my points in some of the work I do. Actually, is that we may sometimes over-identify ourselves through what we do. And I'll tell you, in my business, neurosurgery, you get it in spades, in that it's hard for people, I think, to think of themselves as anything other. And that creates a real problem. There are neurosurgeons that just have a real trouble ever letting go because they, this is just all they are, all they know, all they see them as. They see themselves as. Anyway, so long story short, I am a neurosurgeon, at least by training and many years of trade, and went through the usual rigmarole to get there, of medical school and then residency training. And we could spend hours talking about residency training, but that was quite an experience. And then I worked for many years as a neurosurgeon and bounced around a little bit because I started out in the Army and then went to a place called Geisinger and then really began and developed a neurosurgery department at Virginia Tech, situated in Roanoke, Virginia, and that's where I spent nearly a couple decades. But I did retire from surgery a few years ago now, for a number of reasons. Moved to be closer to a son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter, our only granddaughter.
Love it.
They live in Asheville, North Carolina, and we are about half an hour away in a little town called Black Mountain, North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina. And I'm appalled, but it almost sounds like I'm getting a Southern accent. And for my entire life, people said, "Oh, you're from New Jersey." And I go, "Well, yeah, you're right. I am from New Jersey."
And you're getting the Southern twang. I went to Elon, so I spent some time down in North Carolina, and I would come home from being there for breaks or whatever, and I'd had that twang. And I picked up y'all. I still say y'all. So
that will creep in my speech every so often. I'm not sure I knew that, Sarah. I had three sons. Son number three went to Elon.
How old is he?
Don't ask.
Well, I'm just wondering, or what year did he graduate? Because I was there from 2008 to 2012.
Geez, it's going to be close. He's in his young to mid 30s. I can't
Same.
remember what year he graduated. Yeah,
Maybe I knew him.
you probably did.
It's a small school. So what's his name?
It's a lovely school.
It
First
is.
name's Craig.
Craig Simonds. I feel like I do. I'm gonna have to look it up when we get out. But
Yeah, we're gonna have to figure that one out.
that's incredible. And my little brother actually is currently living in Asheville. And
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
it's so funny now because kids, and I know that you have a lot with teaching and you do a lot of mentoring and teaching with young people. We can definitely chat about that. But what I find so cool is with remote working these days, he was living in Connecticut and one day woke up and was like, I'm going to move to Asheville. Like, why not? I work remote, whatever. So he's down there right now, and it's such a great area. And how long have you been there?
On the order of 4 years,
Okay.
somewhere in that range.
Yeah, because you mentioned you bounced around a little bit. And is that because solely of your background in neurosurgery, or is that also Army stuff? Like, what does that look like? Because I know a little bit about medical stuff because I have some friends where, especially with residency, they'll be just dictated to go to a certain place versus they want to. So is the bouncing around because of your path in brain surgery?
Yeah, I would say yes. In that it, you leave home, you go to college somewhere, right? And then if you go to med school, that's almost certainly going to be in another place. And then when you go to do a residency, that is almost certainly in another place. And sometimes during residency, like in our residency, I did it at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., but it also involved spending time up in Baltimore. That wasn't that far at the Shock Trauma Center there, but then also at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. So, just even inherent in the residency. And then I started in the Army. So originally I went out to, in those days, it was a great assignment to Denver at a hospital there for the Army. And then I was brought back to Walter Reed. And then when we decided to get out of the Army, we ended up in a place up in Pennsylvania. And then I got recruited to do this work at what eventually became Virginia Tech School of Medicine. And so that's down in Roanoke. So we stayed in Roanoke the longest we did in our married career. I got married just before med school.
So I'm sure that was a trip too. You also had just recently got married, then proceeded to go to med school and then move all over the place. So that's an incredible journey.
I actually recommend it. If you're going to
Interesting.
do all that, get married to somebody. Everybody called my wife a saint. And so, yeah, marry a saint who will take care of all your woes, and then it works better.
It does.
I was lucky.
Yes. And so quick question, because the brain surgery part fascinates me. I don't know why of all surgeries, the brain to me is just the coolest one. So when you either were younger or even in your time in the Army, were you always interested in medicine? In specific, were you always interested in the brain? Because it's a pretty specialized and specific type of medicine. What got you into wanting to go down that as a career path versus other types of medicine?
I always say, out of sheer stupidity, I was slated. When you're in med school, some people seem to know what they want to do right from day one, but there's a lot of us who bounced around in terms of specialties. And I was originally going to be a family doc, then I was going to be an internist, then I was going to be a oncologic doc, a cancer doc, and then I was going to be a general surgeon, and finally landed on a cardiothoracic surgeon. And that's what I was working towards. And I had my training, my residency set up. And in my last rotation in medical school, I saw my first brain operation. And I went, oh my God, I've got to do that. um, not knowing at all what I was getting myself
Yeah.
into. so it's been a crazy ride, but it started out pretty crazy because I had to dash all over the country and find a place that would train me, and then go from there. And I had no idea what the training would be like, which was pretty harsh.
I would hope if someone is allowed to cut into your brain, the training would be behind it. And what's it like operating on someone's brain? Like, what is it? That's just the most fascinating part to me is you're behind the brain. So what's it like actually operating?
Yeah, I'd get back to what you said. It's pretty cool, and I think it's cool. I think one nice thing about being in brain surgery or being a neurosurgeon is that because of the organ, we get a lot of street cred. On multiple levels, on the cool level, which is great.
Yeah.
Also, all of a sudden we're put in the same category as rocket scientists or something like that. We're supposed to be super smart, because we operate on the brain. But I think a lot of it is just because the whole idea of everything that we are and do and think and say and love and hate and all that sort of stuff is coming out of that little organ that we're messing around with. So I think it is frequent when you are operating to every once in a while, kind of have your breath taken away with awe of just to be there and just say, "Oh my God." You almost have to put those thoughts out of your head because you don't want to be overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. You need to see it as, maybe a problem that has to be untangled, and you're going to take on the problem, and hopefully you'll get it solved without causing much trouble. But if you sat there every time and went, "This is the seat of the soul. This is all we are. We could, one misstep and we'll lose the piano lessons," or something like that. I think it would paralyze you. So I do get, or would get, that feeling periodically of just a brief. It would always be kind of just a brief where I feel like my breath is taken away for half a second, and then somehow I'm able to kind of shelve it and just get to the problem at hand. But it's cool. There's no two ways about it. It's challenging. The other thing about it is, you got to have a pretty thick hide because there's a lot of bad outcomes. A lot of people
Hmm.
end up in bad shape. And it's not necessarily because we make mistakes, although we do, but it's just the diseases are pretty grim. So you have to get used to a lot of bad outcomes for the poor people that you're taking care of. And so you can face one terrible thing happening, and then just, a few minutes later, you're entering another case. So there's a lot of just shelving your feelings and your thoughts and just focusing on the problem at hand.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about on your site and within your bio that burnout can happen frequently. And does that contribute to it? A lot of those things that are repeating over and over that you do have to shove to the side. And does it catch up with a lot of people where all of a sudden they've sort of repressed all of this stuff for a long time and then they feel this sense of burnout later on?
I would say absolutely, and thank you for asking. And 100%. I'll give you a couple quick vignettes on it. One is kind of an odd one, but I somehow throughout my career, and I did a lot of surgery and a lot of caring for literally tens of thousands of patients, but over time, and it was a rare time where it ever kind of caught up with me, where something kind of broke my heart or made me feel super sad or emotive in any way. And again, I think a lot of it's out of necessity. But I could roll. I mean, there'd be nights where you would tell 10 different families that a loved one was paralyzed or dead or dying or in coma, and I felt it. I know I felt it, but I could kind of roll from one into another, into another, and another. And since I stopped doing that, I find that I cry all the time, which it's just not me. I'll be watching a cat food commercial and start crying because the cat's so darn lovable or something. And I think it's just emblematic of how repressed these emotions are. And I don't think you could be human and not feel them in some way. So if you're burying it to do your job, it's going to come out somewhere, and it's going to come out somehow. So I think on one level, that's a big potential burnout generator. There are many things in the job that can contribute to burnout. But back to your question, we've certainly surveyed many neurosurgeons, about burnout and what they feel the most stress about and stuff like that. And what rises to the top almost always is A, bad outcomes, and B, when you feel like you've contributed to the bad outcome. So it's bad enough that your patient does terrible. But if you think, oh my gosh, I should have done this, or I made a technical error, or I should have thought this, or we should have been on top of this quicker, there's a lot of self-punishment that kicks into gear because you're a human being, they're a human being, you're trying, and you want to be perfect, but you can't be perfect, and I think that's a heavy load. And just as again another self-reflection on it, I operated maybe twice as many cases as the average neurosurgeon. I was a super busy surgeon. And I loved it. I mean, I was jealous if somebody else got a more interesting operation to do or something. So I'd kind of fight for every case I could get. And after stopping, I found that I don't miss it at all. Not a bit, which is, I'm in shock still, because that was one of my biggest worries. What's going to happen if you're not operating? Are you just going to fall apart? And what I realized is that every operation, every single one, carries an element of stress, whether you consider it a simple and easy operation or not, because you're always going for perfect, and you just can't make perfect. It never happens. And you were asking about what's it like to operate on the brain. Another answer could be bloody. The brain loves to bleed, and it's our enemy. The brain at any one moment is getting a fifth, 20% of all blood coming out of the heart. It's very hungry. Yeah, so very hungry, even though it's so small. It's very hungry for blood because the blood carries the oxygen and the glucose. So when you mess with it, and particularly if it's been traumatized, so if it's been in a car accident or there's been an aneurysm rupture or something like that, it bleeds just by touching, just by almost looking at it. And you're often operating at the bottom of a deep hole. So just a little bit of blood obscures everything, and that the stress level goes way up as you're trying to fight the bleeding. And I've shed many a relatively quiet swear word on bleeding alone.
Yes, that's crazy. So this is a question I like to ask also of my medical folks. Do medical shows annoy you? Because that surprises me, because whenever I'm a big Grey's Anatomy fan, anytime they're doing brain surgery, there's no blood. And so now I'm like, that's inaccurate. That's an inaccurate.
Yeah. I was talking to some med students the other day, because I'm teaching medical students, and we were talking about this very, experience, because they had been through a bunch of what they call rotations. They've been out there in the hospital a fair amount. And they said, we used to love those shows. Now they annoy the hell out of me because they're so unreal. And they said, and particularly the sex. Nobody's having sex out there.
Yeah, I'm always like, this seems also irresponsible. I'm like, you're taking care of people.
That's right. But yeah, no, it is very hard to watch a medical show because they're insanely inaccurate. My wife and I, I've never been able to watch much serious stuff other than we like these police procedurals, where a detective is figuring things out, and you go through how they figure things out and stuff. And I've often said, I bet you that police detectives watch these shows and start swearing, "This is ridiculous. They never do that. That's unreal." That's what it's like watching Grey's Anatomy.
On medical. Yes. I know. I feel like all of my medical folks say the same thing because it's entertaining for me as someone that knows nothing. But now if I see a brain surgery on that show, I'm going to say there should be more blood. Gary told me there needs to be more blood on this. So that's funny.
In the book, by the way,
yes.
My last book out is I have 3 books that are nonfiction, but I have a novel out, and it starts they start in the middle of an operation, but in it, blood from the brain surgery runs down the drapes and into the protagonist's shoes, because that is a nice little experience that you get once in a while.
No, for a fact. Okay, cool. So we can now talk about some of your novels, because you also mentioned that you stopped being a brain surgeon. That surprised you that you actually didn't miss it. So you have now transitioned into being an author, being a speaker, teaching. But the novels in particular, you have 3 nonfiction. So what are those geared towards, and what kind of content are the nonfiction to start?
So the nonfictions are all oriented to burnout. So originally, I'll give you a quick story here. And you can always stop me if these stories get too long.
No, I love them. This is your floor. This is anything you want to talk about.
But I ended up in Roanoke because they were looking for somebody to basically create a neurosurgery department and program that would fit into a big clinic model, and then an academic model, meeting with med schools and residents and all that sort of thing. And that was a many-year work, and that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But it got to a point where we got to where we wanted to get. I mean, we had a big army of practitioners, surgeons, physician assistants, residents, all sorts of support personnel. But I was getting all sorts of complaints about the team, getting these formal complaints, and I could get 20, 30, 40 in a month. And I had to answer them all. So it was getting to be a drag.
Paperwork.
And not that it wasn't necessarily complaints about me either, but, so the entire team seemed to be acting like jerks. And I was like, doggone it, something's got to give. And it dawned on me that this may be related to burnout. And I read a bunch of books and studied it and tried, to figure things out with the team, but wasn't getting very far. And then I met a guy who's is basically a physician burnout expert, world expert. He's treated, thousands of physicians. A psychologist. His name's Wayne Sotil. Anyway, he and I got talking, and I said, "Well, you want to see the worst end of the bell-shaped curve? You got to come spend time with my team," which he did, and we really hit it off. And we started working with the team and started trying all sorts of different techniques and stuff. And the reason why I got in, really got into it with both feet is after several months of doing this, after working on what we call resilience, building our resilience, working on wellness, the complaints literally went to zero. We stopped getting complaints. And after a while, the team started winning awards all over the hospital system. And I really became a convert. I was like, I mean, this stuff is real.
Mm-hmm.
And so our going theory was that, most people in the business who seem to be kind of jerky and barky and snapping at people and taking advantage of other people. Anyway, a lot of times they're wonderful people. They're just burned out. They've lost all emotional energy to cope with the daily stressors. And so by building resilience, we can get, much better outcomes. So anyway, to answer your question after another long story.
I love them.
We wrote up our experiences after several years with the team, and it was received pretty nicely. And people started saying, "Well, it's not just neurosurgeons who burn out; So we wrote a second one on physicians, all physicians. Then people said, well, it's not just physicians in healthcare who burn out. So we wrote a third one on all healthcare workers. And then people started saying, well, it's not just healthcare. We said, that's it. We're not doing any more.
Like you have 3 books. Some of these must apply to you in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes, that is incredible. And when were those published? Because I also have to wonder, as you have probably seen this very firsthand, the pandemic did a number on people's burnout rates that were in healthcare or physicians or within surgery. So when were those published, those 3?
The third one, they're all about, I don't know, 2+ years separated. And the third one really came out just shortly before the pandemic, frankly.
Which is probably for the best. Yeah. I mean, that's when people needed a lot of support. And it was a tumultuous time for everyone, but healthcare workers in particular. So I'm sure a lot of people found solace and help with that.
Well, I hope so. I think, the hardest time in the end, I really think occurred after the main storm blew by, because I think people went into crisis mode during, and they just buckled down. I know this is going to be rough, but I'm going to get through it. And then when they get through it and they kind of go, well, what's changed? Has anything changed for the better? I put all that effort in, and, am I seeing a better world and that sort of thing? So I think the potential there is still huge, unfortunately, for burnout.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you're also in teacher mode. So you're also teaching. What types of classes are you teaching and offering? I believe you're also mentoring medical students or people that want to get into the medical field. So what are you doing in the teaching space?
I had a really nice experience while I was still working. There was a good friend. He became a good friend, started the School of Neuroscience at Virginia Tech. And it's pretty a unique thing. It's, a school unto itself within the university, and now has, I think, over 1,000 students in it. But it, a very visionary type guy. His name's Harold Sontheimer, but he's just a great guy. And we became friends, and I got talking to him about, we ought to do some collaborative stuff between what we do and what you guys do. And we came up with the idea of a course for undergrads. And I had my residents teaching the course, so they got the experience of, the teaching side of it all. And then we would bring the undergrads into the hospital every week for several hours every week. And they got to go all over the hospital with my team. They would literally scrub in on the surgeries. They got trained on how to scrub in. They go see emergency consults with us up into the ICUs. I mean, really got a firsthand experience of what it was like, and then got all this teaching from the residents. So we thought it was, just a great experience. And that just had, kind of networked me into the School of Neuroscience side. So when COVID did come and nothing could be done in the hospitals, we flipped it over to me doing it on Zoom.
Yeah.
And then when COVID kind of petered out, we started up a new course with me on Zoom. So anyway, the undergrad course is we call it Exploring Clinical Neuroscience, but what it is we do what's called case-based instruction. We'll do a case, like I have one this afternoon, in fact, not long after we talk, and we're doing brain tumors right now. So I'll show them or talk about the presentation, and they'll see images, and I'll ask them, how would you manage this? And what do you think are the problems and the challenges? But then what's fun about it is we kind of zoom off from there. So we may talk about, like this week, we may talk about, well, how do you break this news to the patient?
Mm-hmm.
How do you tell them they have a deadly brain tumor? What's it like to find out that you have that? And, what sort of resources need to be done? In another session, we may get talking about what's the cost of all this, and how do we reduce costs in healthcare when all they do is skyrocket? We talk about burnout for sure. We also talk about lawsuits and malpractice.
Fun. That's probably fun.
So we explore all that stuff. And then with the medical students, I have something very similar. They're fourth years, and I do most of that by Zoom too. We do some neuroscience ones, but I have one on burnout. I have one on malpractice, and I have one on just life in surgery. I do it for the pre-surgeons just because I know that better for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you say, I also, advise or counsel or whatever the poor pre-meds there at Virginia Tech, which I think are some of the sorriest people on earth. Not because they're at Virginia Tech, just the ridiculous, ness that we put them through.
You've been there because yes, you've been in their shoes.
I would disagree. I was not in their shoes. Well, when I was in college, I played rugby. I was in a fraternity. I chased girls. I mean, I did all the things I was supposed to do. These poor guys, they're in the library 90% of the time. If they're not in the library, they're in a lab somewhere pipetting things. And if they're not in a lab, they have to be in, somewhere, some third world nation building huts or aqueducts or something to show, their dedication to their fellow human beings. They have no collegiate experience.
Yeah. Interesting.
What did you do at Elon, for example?
I was a communications major, and I like to say that I got a solid B average. I rode that like B train. So I had a lot of fun. I was in a sorority. I had a great time. And then I moved back up to the Northeast Coast after I graduated. So I was actually in New York City. I'm from the Southern Connecticut area. So I know you're Jersey as well. So I feel like we have a lot of geography connections. But now I live in Phoenix with my husband and my 15-month-old. So life's a wild ride.
Hoping the temperature at some point comes down, right?
We're going to get into the 90s. So
oh my goodness,
we're feeling like there is something happening, but
people are breaking out their parkas
pretty much. But then on the side, I've been doing all this podcasting work with people that fascinate me. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this podcast, the paranormal stuff is something you also have interest in, as well as it's your nonfiction book that is published, which kind of ties together medical, paranormal, everything. So what got you interested in paranormal, and what made you want to write this book?
Yeah, that one's a little bit, as I guess all of them have stories behind them, but it's a little bit complicated or tangled or whatever. I wouldn't say that I'm some paranormal investigator. What I guess deep down inside, I guess I sometimes have trouble with my fellow neuroscience or basic science people, in that I think sometimes they get awfully convinced of our knowledge, of our understanding of the way existence works. And there's this sense that we can explain everything, or if we can't now, we will be able to. And anything that's beyond explanation isn't real. And I see this thrown at the paranormal world for sure, but at religion and spirituality, and particularly coming in the neuroscience realm, you can kind of go, well, everything is explainable by our brains, all our experiences. And you might be able to, in that if you think about what your brain can do when you sleep, your dreams can be almost anything, and they can seem pretty darn real. But it still gets to the point where just because you can't prove the existence of something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that it's not possible. And I always say, for example, when I listen to, much smarter scientists than I would ever be, these astrophysicists and stuff, and you listen to them starting to riff about, existence, and they'll talk about parallel universes and maybe infinite parallel universes. And I sit there thinking, wait a minute, how is this not, similar to having a religion or believing in something paranormal? So all along, I'm more just agnostic about everything. I have no clue. I can't. I always threw up my hands and said, I'm never going to figure it out myself. So if somebody will show me, all well and good. But I'll remain in the agnostic category, meaning I'm never going to say, oh, that's crazy, it could never happen. I'm going to say, oh, who knows? Yeah. But I think there's a lot of hubris anymore in science, kind of saying, "Oh no, we know or we will know," and then I'll throw even more neuroscience at themselves, and that's that the brain is an amazing machine, right? It's crazy, all the things it does, and you never stop being fascinated by it. But believe me, you just always learn more and more about its complexity. But it's also faulty functioning on many levels. It is not perfect. It is not able to do everything. It filters out a huge amount of data coming into us at any one time. It constructs its own worlds, if you will, for itself to better function within the worlds. It ain't a perfect machine. And therefore, to kind of believe that A, it's going to generate all the answers to everything, and B, even if it did, that we'd understand it with our brains, is a far stretch. So anyway, I just go back to it. The minute you start saying absolutely something doesn't exist, I think that's the same leap of faith as it is to say something does exist.
Right. Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, I like that connection between how is that any different than you following a religion or being spiritual? Like, I'll have a different opinion on it than the person down the street. And it doesn't mean either of us are wrong. It just means that's how we're experiencing the world. And I'm also convinced I'm being haunted like every day. I believe ghosts visit me. I am super witchy and believe in all of that stuff because to me, there's something that we can't explain. And there's actually something really beautiful about that, where it's not always so clinical. Nothing is ever black and white. Like there's something out there, I think, that we just don't know. And it's okay that we don't know.
No, I really resonate with that. I love the way you just put it. It's having this grand mystery in many ways is a beautiful experience. It's the human experience, really, when you think about it. And having a system, a computer or whatever this is that our brain is, that can contemplate it is even more of this delightful, beautiful thing to existence. So yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. So I have another pod host use this term, and I love it. I think it describes me. I'm more like I said, I'm a little bit more agnostic. I don't know, but I'm an optimistic agnostic, where I kind of believe that these things are out there. I've never experienced it myself for sure, but I was raised in a household. My mom, my grandmom were both Scottish, and they I live in the house with them. And I say Scottish because I think the British are much more accepting to, the paranormal. And they both absolute believers. They both had multiple stories of ghosts that they encountered throughout their lives. And so I was raised on that, and read all the kids' ghost books and all that when I was growing up, for sure. So with the book, when I was doing the book, what I wanted really was to give a eyes wide open exposure to my former world. And I really wanted the reader to feel what it was like to be there, to watch the brain bleeding, and you got to figure out how to stop it. You don't have a lot of time to do so. And I thought, there are a few very good descriptions of the neurosurgical world out there in book form, but they're all nonfiction. And I thought it might be much more immersive, experiential, just like we did with the undergrads, to, put you guys there in the operating room. So I thought fiction would work better, and I played with a bunch of different ideas. And then, the whole ghost thing started haunting me, if you will. I started thinking, well, we spend a lot of time throughout my career around death. And around people who are making the transition. In the book, we kind of talk about it, people crossing the bridge from life to death. And we're always trying to drag somebody back, if you will.
Yeah.
But one way or the other, there's a lot of throughput on that bridge. And so if there was a ghost, if there were ghosts, if there was a spirit world, and they were trying to interface with the living, maybe it would be people who are on that bridge or near the bridge all the time that they would see as the easiest to interact with. And that's how that idea started germinating, was, well, what if my neurosurgeon starts seeing ghosts? What would that mean? What would be their purpose? Is he crazy? Are the ghosts real? If they are real, what are they doing? And to set him up to maybe have these experiences. He's certainly burned out, so he's under a lot of psychological stress.
Yeah.
And so then I want the readers to play with the idea: could these ghosts be real? Is he just losing his mind? Why is he in the situation that he's at? I also wanted the reader to think about what's scarier, the supernatural world or the natural world of what he was experiencing every day. So,
yeah,
long story, but that's how that book came from.
It's interesting because it also, over the course of our conversation, still combines a lot of the things that you discuss in your very nonfiction books. It's
Sure.
a lot of the same concepts, because you just basically also answered my question of like, why did you go to fiction and like what made you want to make that switch? But I feel like you've still done it in a way where you're incorporating everything that you've experienced, just now in a different way. And I won't lie to you, I don't really have a real need to be reading nonfiction books on neurosurgery, but this is right up my alley. And I feel like you're opening up your doors to a lot of people that aren't going to be brain surgeons, but it will be really fascinating to read from your like perspectives and from your experience. So
that's what I'm hoping. So far the reviews have been very nice. So I'm still steeling myself for a really scathing one. So I almost rather somebody send one in so I can.
Do you want me to make one up and just like do it right after this?
That might be good, just to get it out of the way.
No, I mean, everyone's going to have their own things to say. I even get it in this crazy Instagram world that I live in sometimes, where you're going to get an interesting person here and there, but overall it seems like it's been well received. And I know a lot of my friends would be thrilled. I'm thinking of my friend Ashley. Ashley, if you're reading, she's all about anything like this. So I think it's cool that you've now diversified yourself into teaching, authoring, writing, mentoring. You do so much more. And that's all spun out from the career that you started afoot on. So
yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting, Sarah, you must see this, therefore, like in the various media, but what they say about books, and you really learn that lesson very quickly, is, you see it as your baby, and, you're working with your baby, and you spend a lot of time and effort with your baby. But the minute you release it, the minute you put it out there, it's not yours anymore. You can't say, no, this is absolutely, the way it goes. Everybody's interpretation is everybody's interpretation. So it actually is really fun to hear how people respond to it, particularly when they think different from what I was thinking originally. Because sometimes you go, oh yeah, no, that's even better than what I was thinking.
Yeah. Or it's always like those exercises when you're growing up of you read the same novel as a class and what is everyone pulling from that? Or my mom and I are avid readers and luckily like the same stuff. And we'll even talk about something that we both read. I'm like, wait, what? That's what you thought that meant to me? That's not anything like I thought. And so it's cool. And I think I was just talking to another friend about this. She published a book as well, where she's like, this is my way of putting this out into the world for longer term, because even as teachers, even that's the class you teach it, the class is done. But with this, your book will live and live out in the world. And I just think it's so cool that you've
What
published.
hopes?
Oh, yeah. I'm proud of you. So if that means anything. But
Hasn't been banned yet. That's good.
no, yeah. I feel like that there's always going to be riffraff. I try my best to like stay in my lane and do what I can. But life's messy and that's okay. But where can people find the book? Where can people find you? And if you want to do plugs for yourself, and I'll make sure to tag up everything in the show notes so people can find all these links. But where do you want people to head to learn more about you and your books?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is just to go to my website. And that's just my name.com. So it's Gary R. Simonds, but it's spelled like Simonds, Simonds. So it's GaryRSimonds.com. And there's a lot about the books and stuff that we can talk about. One of the biggest reasons why I did it, one of the many, I guess, but really a big reason about it, behind it was I just love discussing this stuff, like what we're talking about today. And so I really wanted the book to open up discussion points. And I really want to hear from people and, hear what they think and where they think the story would go even beyond this. Several people have said, well, when's the sequel coming out? I'm going, I thought I finished it.
That was my question. Or maybe not a sequel, but maybe another book entirely, maybe a different situation.
Well, it's funny. There were 2 points to that one. One, I had another book written before I even started. Well, I had started this book many years ago, but it was just in bits and pieces. And so I had another book that I had written and rewritten because when you write these darn things, you end up rewriting them dozens of times. It felt like, in fact, this book originally was 250,000 words, and now it's 100,000. So I had to cut out a book and a half. There were all sorts of subplots. There was a witch.
I love
you had
that.
told me about the witch, and there was a witch, a very involved witch, and there was a pro football player. I mean, there was all sorts of subplots going on, and I realized that I'm not David Baldacci or somebody like that, and nobody's going to buy that book. That book
that would be a hefty read.
Words.
That would be a hefty one. That would definitely, I think, be a little intimidating to some, but. Where you take this, I feel like the options are endless for you. I think you could. So
the witch is out there somewhere. But the other book that I had written, I still have to do rewrites on it now. But it's more of a YA novel, completely in a different world, about a soccer playing guy, and there is a motivation behind that. I worry that guys are falling off the curve in terms of academic performance and need to read. I think reading's the solution to so many things. Yeah. So I was trying to think of, come up with a book that guys might read. I think I've put it out to a bunch of women, and they say it's very readable for women, and they'll enjoy it too. But I was hoping to, at least make something that guys might read, just to encourage more of that. So it's very sports oriented and that sort of thing.
I'm with you. My husband is not a reader at all. He's a podcast guy though, which is an interesting thing because now we have all this media where I do think that the other day he did listen to some 2-hour long podcast on Venus flytraps. I was like, first off, why?
Wow.
Second, okay. I mean, you learned something that's great. But I agree that we need to be focusing on reading and that type of learning. So that's awesome. And I hope you continue with that. And I'm looking forward to all the cool things that you do.
Well, you're too kind.
I'm going to tag everything. I'll tag everything up and put it in the show notes if you want to check out Gary. I appreciate you for coming in the tent. Once you're in for life. That's what I say. So you are now a tentie, as I call everyone. So
great. I cannot tell you how appreciative I am. And it's a delight.
Thank you so much. It was so good talking to you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too, and stay cool.
Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the Welcome to My Tent podcast. I hope you had as much fun listening as I do recording. I am so happy to have you here, and see you next episode.